Shalom, shalom. This week's Parsha is Parshat Vayeira, and I want to take a few minutes to look at the accounting of the destruction of Sedom and Gomorrah. So, we are told that God had been fed up with the evil actions of Sedom and Gomorrah and thought that they needed to be destroyed. But before he did that, he said, "Can I conceal this from Abraham?" And the reason why he thinks he can't conceal it from Abraham, it says, is because he's sure to become a great and mighty nation, and all the nations of the earth shall be blessed through him. And he knows that he will command the children and his children after him in the ways of tzedek and mishpat, in the ways of, as it says here in English, charity and justice. But we're going to look at those words in a second. And then we have this whole accounting that God tells him what he's going to do, and Abraham starts bargaining. He's like, well, are you going to destroy this great city if there are, righteous among them? You're going to destroy the righteous because of the evil? And then he starts with, if there are 50 righteous people, will you not destroy them? And God says no. And then he does this whole bargaining down, because apparently there weren't 50, and then 40, 30, 10. He goes, a lot of arguing back and forth. And so the question that's always given is, why do we have this lengthy thing? God could have just told him he's going to destroy the nations, and told him why the back and forth, why all this activity. And so I think that the answer lies in these words that we just read, and that it was because God wanted to instruct Avraham in how to properly bring tzedek and mishpat, which I think tzedek means what is right, when you have conceptually in your mind what is right and what is wrong. But mishpat is the justice, is bringing that to fruition, like a court system, right? You argue what the tzedek, what the idea is, what's right, and then you have a sentence at the end, and that's the carrying out of the mishpat. So I think that God needed to instruct Abraham in his ways, because I don't think that this was something, as a great person as he was, I don't think that this was something that he had to be learned. It wasn't innate in him. As we see, Abraham was extremely merciful, and we see different stories in the Torah of him being merciful, and maybe to the point of letting certain things happen that shouldn't have. Let's start back with the story of Lot. Undoubtedly, he saw things that were wrong with Lot. He let him come with him anyway, and he waited till it got so bad to separate, when already all their shepherds were in this big heated debate or fight, and he has to come up with some solution, and he's forced to the corner to say, let's separate ways. And he was very magnanimous about it, but it was hard for him, and he probably should have done something earlier, not let it get to that point. Probably, I'm just saying. And the reason why I believe this so much so is because even in this week's parsha, because there's these three angels, when they're told about the destruction of Sedom, we know that one came to tell them that they're going to have a son, and a year later they have their son Yitzchak. And what happens? There's a 13-year difference between Yitzchak and Ishmael, Hagar's son from Abraham. And Sarah sees Ishmael acting in ways that were not acceptable, that were harmful, that couldn't exist in her home, that would be a healthy environment for her son. And she said to Abram, I want you to banish them from the home. And this, we're told from the verse, it says that Abram, this was very bad, this was evil in Abram's eyes. And then God had to come to him and say, listen to your wife Sarah, listen to what she's telling you, and do this. Sometimes you have to be cruel to be kind. Sometimes you have to do things that it hurts our sense of compassion, and it's bothersome to us to see these things with our eyes, but in the end they have to be done in order for a greater good. And we see that in this story with Ishmael and Yitzchak, God says there, because Yitzchak is going to be a great nation, but also Yishmael will be a great nation. So don't worry, Yishmael will be okay, but because they're both going to be great nations, they cannot live together under, one roof, and for things to go in the destiny that Yitzchak needed. And this separation, even though it's painful, was for the greater good. And these two nations, we see that Ishmael was brought up in the same house. He had the same exact exposure to the things that Yitzchak had. But yet, we're told that he made bad decisions. He decided on things. Maybe it was his nature, because we're told specifically that the son of Hagar, the Mitzri, the Egyptian, that he had these Egyptian ways, a tendency, a nature that inclined him to do certain things that were wrong and bad. And he didn't battle them correctly. He didn't fight them. He gave into them, and he was living in the home of Abraham, and they were destructive. They were destructive. Sarah said, "My son cannot grow up with this kind of influence because it's just gonna destroy him." And that was hard for Abraham, but this was a lesson. That was a lesson for him also that he had to learn. And that's why I think in the story with Sedom and Gomorrah, God was trying to explain to Abraham how to achieve tzedek and mishpat, what you have to do. He says, "I will go down and see," because obviously God doesn't have to go down and see anything. He knows everything. But he's teaching Abraham that when something comes your way and you want what you believe to be tzedek, because in your head you might think compassion is the right thing to do, but you have to see with your own eyes and understand what's going on. And then you have to, as hard as it is, there has to be consequences for bad actions. And he was telling them that the places of Sedom and Gomorrah were too far gone to be saved, and the most compassionate thing for the world is to destroy these people. They weren't doing themselves any good either. Keeping them alive and being self-destructive is not doing them good. It's not doing the world good. It's not doing anybody good. But God had to teach him what that is to do. And I love the fact that God says, "I will go down and see with my own eyes, and if it is what I see, I will destroy." So it's teaching people, especially we see in the world today, that we're living in Israel, and people make all sorts of assessments based on information. Sometimes too much to one way, so much too much the other way. But sometimes they think they're having compassion. And they're like, well, they judge Israel harshly for going to war. Well, we all know who live here that the Israelis don't want war. We hate war. We don't want to send off our sons. We don't want to send off our husbands. This is painful for us. What they do, the soldiers, is painful for them. But we have no choice. They have done evil things, and there has to be consequences, and we have to restore order. And in order to do that, sometimes we have to do things that don't look compassionate to the naked eye just alone, but they are, in the bigger sense, they are what is tzedek, what is mishpat, what is right, and what has to be done. And we have to remember that. And people that don't live in Israel should come and see for themselves and then make their decisions. If they're looking in earnest, they will see what the truth is. And unfortunately, this is what has to be done. But this is what God is telling Abraham, and this is why he had to go through these things and learn them, because God says he knows that Abraham wants to instruct and will instruct his descendants in what is tzedek and what is mishpat. But he has to know and learn that first. And so God was teaching him through these incidents, and this is what makes Abraham great. Despite the fact that it had to fight against his compassionate nature, he understood, after being taught from God, that sometimes you have to do things that go against what you feel and that can hurt you emotionally, but are the right thing in the long run. And that's the lesson. That's what I get from these stories. And I wish you all a Shabbat Shalom, safe, peaceful, beautiful Shabbat. Peace out.